Hi, friends. So I've had a small number of you insist that there is a connection between 5G and coronavirus, and I still say there is not. And also, there is a lot of hype about 5G that is wrong, and people are kind of getting carried away with things that aren't true about 5G and about coronavirus. Now, I don't want to get too heavily into this because, first of all, it's just way too hypersensitive a topic. Second, I don't proclaim to be an expert on this, and just because I'm not really all that interested in it, to be honest. But I did want to touch on it to show a few things that I came across, and you can take it for whatever you want. If you don't agree, fine. Don't. It's up to you. First of all, the one thing that is going on is comparing the maps of 5G rollout to instances of coronavirus.
This map shows where 5G is currently available in the US. And you have like pink, black, blue. So I think pink is Verizon, black might be AT&T, blue might be T-Mobile. So these are the carriers. You would pretty much have the same map here as you have here. I mean, you would literally be able to take this map and overlay it on top of this map, and you would have the same exact map.
Now let's put this to the test and see if he's right. Okay, so there's a circle over here. So you got an instance, but that's Vancouver. So that's not the same place. This is, let's say this is this one here. And then there's this one here. There's a few instances here, but there is no 5G here. And there's some in this territory here, and here, and here, but there's no instances of coronavirus here. So, and then there's this here, there's no instance of coronavirus here. So it isn't the same. And there's quite a few territories in this region. It looks like quite heavy coverage, but there's hardly any outbreaks of coronavirus in this area. It isn't a direct copy. It isn't identical. I mean, it's a misrepresentation. That's obvious. It's a misrepresentation. And arguably, these locations are in urban centers where most people live. And so it is likely as well that outbreaks are going to occur where most people live, given we assume that this virus is, legit. So I want to also point out that this is the coverage available for 5G. Now this is PC Mag, which is a reputable computer magazine, and there's an article that was issued January 10th, 2020, so it's fairly recent. It says 5G home internet won't happen until later in 2020. It seems to only be signing up new customers in Chicago. So here's the Verizon 5G cities as of December 23rd, 2019. It doesn't include the other services. So that's why some of these territories are not marked. These are all major cities. You got Washington, New York, Providence, Boston. I mean, it stands to reason that you're going to put your 5G rollout in the major urban centers first. The problem seems to be a lack of millimeter wave home modems. You need a new antenna chipset to help Verizon stretch out its home 5G service. and they haven't seen any retail devices featuring the chip. So the problem at the moment seems to be that the devices haven't caught up to the technology yet. So from what I understand, which I'll cover later, you need to have the 5G technology in place. You need to have a device that accesses that technology, and you need to have a package that accesses that technology. A lot of these services will provide 5G technology for free for a while to test it out. So the package is kind of irrelevant. And but that doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't activated 5G. They have, only in certain cities. Verizon says it offers wireless home internet in 5 cities. Most recently adding Chicago to a previous list of Sacramento, Los Angeles, Houston, and Indianapolis. It offers its millimeter wave mobile 5G in 31 cities. So the home wireless or the home internet service of 5G is different than the 5G for cell phones. In Canada, Rogers is the only telecom network to release 5G so far. Bell is behind, and Rogers and Bell are the 2 major services in Canada. Now, Rogers goes live with 5G service in Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, and Montreal. Rogers 5G service will be included with Rogers Infinite plans at no extra charge until March 2021, and this was dated March 6, 2020. Today, because of the official release of the Samsung Galaxy S20 5G series, the network is now live. So again, this is because one product, the receiver, is available, so they have to put the network live. So here's their map. 5G's in Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, and Vancouver. 4G only has access to these territories. It's not everywhere. So the impression that we're getting of this 5G technology is not as extensive as we think it is. Rogers 5G network will use 2.5 gigahertz spectrum in the downtown cores, and later this year will use 600 megahertz 5G spectrum. Rogers said it will also deploy 3.5 gigahertz spectrum and dynamic spectrum sharing, which allows 4G spectrum to be used for 5G. So February 1st, 2019, this was a year ago. Europe targets 5G rollout in every major city by 2020. And this is S&P Global Market Intelligence. It's very important where you get your information from, because there's a lot of misleading sources and misleading sites. And a lot of these fear-mongering websites and YouTube channels are putting out inaccurate information because they're getting it from other fear-mongering YouTube sites, YouTube channels, and websites. So this is a commercial rollout of 5G in at least one major city in the European Union by 2020. So it's a test ground. EU member states closed 2018 with 138 trials of 5G networks in 35 cities. Spain, France, Germany, and Italy led the region's activity, accounting for 40% of 5G trials performed. Some of the cities already in 5G trials at the end of 2018 were Ghent, Belgium, Tallinn, Estonia, Espoo, Finland, Berlin, Amsterdam, Milan, Barcelona, Stockholm, and London. So this was 5G trials at the end of 2018. Now, would it not stand to reason that if 5G was causing coronavirus, it would have broken out first in these cities? Why don't we have an outbreak in 2018 of coronavirus in these cities? There is no correlation. For these trials, the 3.4 gigahertz to the 3.8 gigahertz band was the most useful frequency band. The mid-band spectrum, that's what this is. While low-band spectrum was widely used for 4G wireless services because it can travel long distances and penetrate obstacles, that spectrum has become crowded. So they're using this low-band spectrum frequency range in order to send data, but because they've been using it for 4G wireless services, the data that's being sent on that spectrum, that range of frequency, has become crowded, and that's why they're expanding to this mid-range spectrum. High band spectrum is good for high data throughput, but it cannot travel far distances or penetrate various surfaces. Mid-band spectrum combines qualities of both, and it is seen across the world, I'm not going to say that word, as obvious anchor spectrum for the 5G networks to come. So the mid-band spectrum is where they want to reside, which is the 3.4 to 3.8 range. Whereas high band is good for high data, but it can't travel far. So they're not going to go much higher than this. It doesn't serve them to go much higher than this. So the 60 gigahertz that people are pushing in terms of fear mongering is not accurate. They don't want to use it. And I'll show you that in a minute. So there's 5G deployment in Europe. So you've got a couple cities all through here. France has 5, Poland has 4, and Italy has 6. Those are the major locations. So why are we not seeing a massive outbreak in Europe in 2018? There can't be a correlation. Now, basically, some people are saying that the reason that there is a correlation is because 5G weakens the immune system and suppresses the oxygen levels, which I'll get to in a minute, because that is what allows people to die of the disease of the coronavirus, because their immune system is suppressed because they have a lack of oxygen. So anyway, okay, so this is China. Spotlight on 5G, how China's 5G mobile plans compares to the rest of the world, January 30th, 2020. According to Ookla's 5G map, commercial 5G has been deployed in 6,490 locations across the world, with the bulk of it in North America, and by a total of 106 operators. Apart from having a 5G device and a 5G network to connect to, another important requirement is a 5G plan. So you need those 3 elements in order to access 5G. They did say that you would be able to use 5G without paying for it, so I don't know how much this 5G plan is necessary. China is at the forefront of 5G, not only with respect to the network coverage, but also with devices. Now, this is the official website for accessing an up-to-date dashboard, as they call it, to show you where outbreaks have occurred for coronavirus. It is GIS and data maps. I don't know if you recall the map for where 5G rollout was, but for Canada it's very simple. It's Vancouver, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal. There's some here. Confirmed cases 36, no deaths, recovered 4, active 32. Doesn't say where it is. And here, BC, 32, 1 death, 4 recovered, active. Now I have a question. Where do they get their statistics from? Because, first of all, your health's supposed to be confidential. I can understand that they would be able to provide statistics to say, you know, we have a few cases and we report it to some center to say, yes, we have a few cases. But even for the most part, if somebody, you know, gets a cold, they're not going to go to the hospital with it. They're just going to stay home. So obviously what these are is a summary by state and province, not by city. So it's impossible to determine at this level where these cases are coming from, whether they're coming from the major cities or whether they're coming from other places. It is possible they're coming from the major cities, but it doesn't say. So I just want to clear that up. I mean, Europe is pretty big. China is just explosive. But the rest of the world, I mean, there's nothing in Russia. Absolutely nothing. There's nothing here. Kazakhstan. Why would that be? There's hardly anything in Africa. Now, this woman was referred to me by a subscriber, a viewer, and she has 164,000 subscribers, which is suspicious for Truth Community. Her video has over almost 1 million views, 753,000 views. Also suspicious for a truther channel. She's been on here for 3 years, has hardly any videos, but they all have tens of thousands of views. So, and one of the videos that I'll show you, Nibiru, New Age Truther Turned to Christ, my testimony, RFID chip. So, see, 3 years ago, there's not a lot of videos here. She started 3 years ago. Granted, she might have taken some videos down, but all of them have suspiciously high amounts of views. 82,000, 44,000, 10,000, 43,000, 457,000. This is not normal for a truther channel, so this is highly suspicious, especially when you're talking about Nibiru, which is a load of garbage. Now, here's what she has to say.
So, the impacts of 60 gigahertz are not widely published information, but here's what I can tell you. And it's in part, ironically, from the promotional material of the big telecom companies themselves. Here it says, 60 gigahertz has a very distinct impact on none other than oxygen itself. Yes, here are the articles released by companies who are touting the benefits of 60 gigahertz. They openly admit that 60 gigahertz is absorbable by oxygen. You can see in this graph here its impact on oxygen. All the frequencies before 60 gig are non-impacted. Then once it hits that frequency, it spikes and becomes hugely absorbed by oxygen.
Okay, so this is the article that she was referring to. Fixed wireless communications at 60 gigahertz unique oxygen absorption properties, April 10th, 2001. So it's kind of outdated. And this is from RF Global Net. Due to the increased bandwidth demands and scarcity of microwave frequency allocations, the wireless communication industry is beginning to focus on higher, previously unallocated portions of the spectrum in the millimeter wave frequencies from 40 gigahertz to 300 gigahertz. Now, we've already heard this, right? Due to the high levels of atmospheric RF energy absorption, the millimeter wave region of the RF spectrum is not usable in long-haul wireless communication segments. However, for short-haul last-mile segments, the expanded RF data bandwidth available in the millimeter wave region makes it ideal for interference-free fiber speed connectivity. This figure, this is the diagram she was showing, illustrates the atmospheric absorption for millimeter wave frequencies. At the millimeter wave frequency of 60 gigahertz, the absorption is very high, with 98% of the transmitted energy absorbed by atmospheric oxygen. While oxygen absorption at 60 gigahertz severely limits range, it also eliminates interference between same frequency terminals. So, the benefit of oxygen absorption relative to frequency reuse is detailed in Figure 2. Figure 2. Figure 2 illustrates the distance relationship between the 60 gigahertz frequency reuse range, the green region, and the traditional range, the blue region. Oxygen absorption makes possible the same frequency reuse within very localized region of airspace. Operation within the 60 gigahertz millimeter wave spectrum enables very dense interference-free deployment of same frequency radio terminals. At 60 gigahertz, communication systems must overcome the effects of oxygen absorption. 16 dB per kilometer, I guess. In order to operate reliably at even short ranges, a very focused narrow beam antenna must also be employed to increase the level of signal available to the target receiver. This combination of oxygen absorption and a narrow beam transmission enhances the security of the 60 gigahertz radio link, minimizing the probability of unauthorized intercept. All it's talking about is how oxygen interferes with the signal. Everything reached frequency. Why is the 60 gigahertz band not good for long-range communications? This is August 17th, 2017. At 60 gigahertz, oxygen molecules in the atmosphere interact with the radio frequency signals to cause significant attenuation. Attenuation, in case you want to know, reduction of the force, effect, or value of something. So basically it becomes less powerful. Due to this attenuation of the 60 gigahertz band is not a good frequency to use for long-range radar or communication applications. At 60 gigahertz, oxygen can cause an attenuation of up to 10 dB per km. I don't know what that means. As we go higher up in frequency, gases in the atmosphere start to react with radio. I'm used to the advertising RF. Radio frequency signals causing attenuation. As seen in the diagram below, oxygen causes significant attenuation at 60 gigahertz, and water vapor causes similar attenuation at 24 gigahertz and 184 gigahertz. So this is the attenuation, 0 to 100, and this is the wavelength, and this is the frequency. So the frequency we are looking at here, so there's 60 gigahertz. Now remember, the range that 5G operates in is below 6, and this starts at 10. So it's not even on the chart here. But so here's 20 gigahertz, which there was some mention of around 24 gigahertz. There's some influx up there. I mean, this is kind of misrepresenting what's going on, because this is all micro level, and then it goes to 100 up here. So at 60 gigahertz, this chart, it rises up to 20. Average absorption of millimeter waves rises to 20, and this is 4. However, this attenuation only really matters in long-range communications. The 60 gigahertz band can still be used for short-range communications such as local wireless area networks. The 60 gigahertz band can also be used for communications between satellites, okay, you mean a balloon, in the high Earth orbit. Since there is almost no oxygen in space at geosynchronous altitudes of 43,000 kilometers or 26,000 miles, attenuation at this frequency is minimal. Okay, so basically they're saying that it has to do with the signal. It doesn't have anything to do with oxygen itself.
Now, in this article by the companies selling products that are going to run on 60 gig, they say that it's going to help its interference levels. Oh, isn't that nice? They don't want your first shooter video games to lag. And most of us know from mainstream releases promoting FIVEG that things like water and trees are going to get in the way of this frequency. So how in the world does this even make sense that we are using it?
All right, so I was trying to find studies that show a correlation between the oxygen absorption and effects on humans on a biological level. November 2009, so This is quite old. It's like 10 years old. But it says evaluation of the potential biological effects of 60 gigahertz millimeter waves upon human cells. I mean, this is like the gold, the gold document that everybody should be looking for. We investigate potential biological effects of low power millimeter wave radiation on human cell viability and intracellular protein homeostasis, a specific exposure system allowing to perform far-field exposures with power densities close to those expected from the future wireless communications in the 60 gigahertz band has been developed and characterized. Specific absorption rate SAR values were determined for the biosamples under test using the FDTD method. I don't know what that is, but any scientist would know. It was shown that millimeter wave radiation at 60.42 gigahertz and with a maximum incident power density of 1 MWCM, etc., does not alter cell viability, gene expression, and protein conformation. Our results indicate that exposure to low power radiations around 60 gigahertz does not cause any significant effect. However, they do not exclude a possibility of existence of local subcellular effects or effects potentially induced by prolonged exposures. Moreover, we cannot neglect possible synergistic effects and eliminate the possibility that other exposure parameters like frequency, exposure time, or field polarization may have effects on biosystems. Therefore, additional gene markers and radiation parameters should be further analyzed for extensive investigation of the potential biological effects of millimeter waves. Analysis of atmospheric effects due to atmospheric oxygen on wideband digital signal in the 60 gigahertz band. And thesis submitted to the faculty of Virginia Polytechnic Institute at State University in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Master of Science. So this is just somebody who's done a paper for their master's degree. As lower microwave frequency bands become saturated with users, there is a motivation for the research of applications that utilize higher frequencies, especially the 60 gigahertz band. This band is plagued with high atmospheric absorption due to atmospheric oxygen, but has a lot of bandwidth, which makes it desirable for multimedia applications. Recently, research of wideband digital links within the 60 gigahertz band gained the interest of wireless communication industry when the FCC announced that license is not required for wideband digital signal in this band. Previous research on 60 gigahertz signals focused on how much attenuation due to atmospheric oxygen exists in the link. But a look at the physical properties of atmospheric oxygen reveals both the reason why atmospheric oxygen absorbs electromagnetic waves and how pressure affects atmospheric oxygen. Atmospheric oxygen resonates at 60 gigahertz due to transitions between its three closely spaced rotational states. These transitions, combined with the magnetic dipole moment of atmospheric oxygen, cause attenuation and phase dispersion in electromagnetic waves. Okay, I hope you all understand that. At lower pressures, the individual resonance lines of atmospheric oxygen appear in the attenuation and the phase dispersion plots. As pressure increases, the resonance lines broaden and contribute to neighboring resonant lines. The effect of attenuation and phase dispersion in wideband signal becomes greater at lower atmospheric pressures, which results in signal distortion. The signal distortion leads to more bit errors and results in the presence of intersymbol interference in the received signal. Okay, so I just read the summary. I'm not going to repeat it because basically everything that they say in the summary is already stated in the opening. But this thesis is all about how atmospheric oxygen affects the signal and the receptivity of the signal. So here's another study This is from NCBI, U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. The effects of long-term exposure to 60 gigahertz millimeter wavelength radiation on the genotoxicity and heat shock protein, HSP, expression of cells derived from the human eye. Rapid introduction of wireless devices has increased the use of millimeter wavelength 30 to 300 gigahertz technologies, and with it increased public concern about possible adverse effects of radiation sources on human health. Conclusions. The findings from the present study suggest that exposure of HCET and SRA01-4 cells to millimeter wavelength radiation at 60 gigahertz for 24 hours has no significant effect on MN frequency, signal strand breaks in the DNA, or HSP expression. The exposure of cells to millimeter wavelength radiation at 60 gigahertz does not seem to have adverse effects on the genotoxicity or HSP expression of cultured HCET and SRA014 cells using our specific experimental conditions, although the possible effects of other frequencies require further study. So there you have it. No effects.
Unless their intentions are something else besides faster speeds. Anyway, knowing that this frequency impacts oxygen, now does it make sense to you how possibly when you mess with the absorption of oxygen in the human body, let me give you one guess which organ is going to suffer first. The way that the 60 gigahertz impacts oxygen is this. Oxygen, the atom, is O. Oxygen, the molecule, is O2, two atoms together. Now these two atoms creating the oxygen molecule are sharing some electrons. 60 gigahertz causes the electrons surrounding oxygen molecules to spin. Right. Somewhat akin to how high-powered microwaves running on 2.4 are impacting molecules in foods such as water. They're heating in part by impacting those molecules to rotate or oscillate with each wave. The movement energy from the rotation of these super tiny water molecules is actually helping to heat the rest of the food. So in a similar way that 2.4 causes H2O to oscillate, 60 gigahertz, even at lower powers, is causing the electrons on oxygen molecules to spin.
So this is an article on Android Authority. 5G is not going to microwave your brain. July 30th, 2019. There's a major difference between safe radiation and bad type associated with places like Chernobyl or X-ray machines. This is the difference between ionizing and non-ionizing radiation. Ionizing radiation appears at wavelengths above ultraviolet light, aka X-rays and gamma rays. These can damage your DNA by knocking electrons out of the base molecules, leading to tumors and cancer. So these are ultraviolet, X-ray, gamma rays, broken bonds, damages DNA, medical X-rays, tanning booths. Visible light, optical excites electrons, photochemical effects. And then there's the microwave and radio waves within the thermal spectrum. Induces high currents, heating, AM, FM radio, Wi-Fi, they all sit in the same range. Non-thermal induces low current, static field power lines, extremely low frequency. Those are non-ionizing. Lower frequency radio waves, like what is used for LTE mobile networks, are non-ionizing. They can't cause the same type of damage. Certain non-ionizing wavelengths can still be bad for you as they produce heat at extremely high power level. Your microwave can warm up some nasty TV dinners just fine, but it requires more than 1,000 watts of power to do so. Many studies have looked at if radio frequencies, electromagnetic radiation can affect healthy people. A literature review in 2009 and the 2010 Interphone study both summarized the lack of findings on this topic quite well. In 2011, the World Health Organization declared cell phones as a Class 2B carcinogen, meaning the technology may be linked to cancer. This does not instantly imply that the level of exposure from commercial products is dangerous. Other Class 2B carcinogens include pickles, aloe vera leaf extract, and being a firefighter. What the heck? The semantics are important here. There have been no conclusive results indicating mobile technologies are eminently dangerous to humans. Many astroturfers rely on how difficult it is to contextualize scientific results to make wild claims that go unchecked for a long time. In particular, they often cite one specific study as proof for their misinformation. The U.S. National Toxicology Program, in 2016, the U.S. Toxicology Program released draft findings of studies examining the effects of non-ionizing radiation on rats and mice. All exposure applied 7 days a week for about 9 hours a day. A single common group of unexposed rats or mice of each sex served as control. However, it's important to remember a few rats getting tumors when exposed to between 2 and 4 times the allowed limit of RF EMR for cell phones does not constitute proof of anything. You will never be exposed to the amount of RF EMR used in this study. With the mice, they used ludicrously high power levels, up to 10 watts per kilogram for 2-year studies and 15 watts per kilogram for short-term ones. All test groups actually had a higher survival rate than the control group, illustrating how correlation is not causation. Many foundations, like the American Cancer Society, report the study without taking a strong stance. But the FDA, National Cancer Institute, and FCC all note that the overwhelming evidence points to the safety of cell phones and technologies like Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, even after considering the study's results.
And as you might imagine, changes to the spin frequencies on oxygen electrons can have impacts on human biology. When you breathe in, the reason that breathing air into your lungs gets oxygen into your blood and therefore in important places like your brain is because the oxygen entering into your lungs gets picked up by a very important iron-containing protein called hemoglobin in your blood. But the unfortunate impact of oxygen molecules spinning the electrons is that it makes the hemoglobin unable to uptake the oxygen and get it to the rest of your body. Now, this info is taken from a textbook called Magnetobiology, Underlying Physical Problems. But even beyond this, isn't the fact that the telecom companies are admitting that 60 gigahertz is absorbable by oxygen just stunning information?
All right, this is about magnetobiology. It is the study of biological effects of mainly weak static and low frequency magnetic fields which do not cause heating of tissues. And an example of magnetobiology effect is the magnetic navigation by migrant animals by means of magnetoreception. Many animal orders such as birds, marine turtles, reptiles, amphibians, and salmonoid fishes are able to detect small variations of the geomagnetic field and its magnetic inclination to find their seasonal habitat. A 2014 double-blind study showed that European robins exposed to low-level electromagnetic noise between about 20 kilohertz and 20 megahertz could not orient themselves with their magnetic compass. When they entered aluminum-screened huts, which attenuated electromagnetic noise in the frequency range from 50 kilohertz to 5 megahertz by approximately 2 orders of magnitude, their orientation reappeared. So that range is nowhere near gigahertz. This is an irrelevant study. People are immersed in electromagnetic fields from such sources as power lines, domestic appliances, mobile phones, even electrical storms. All living beings sense electrical fields, but the physical origins of the phenomenon are still unclear. Magnetobiology considers the effects of electromagnetic fields on living organisms. It provides a comprehensive review of relevant experimental data and theoretical concepts and discusses all major modern hypotheses on the physical nature of magnetobiological effects. It also highlights some problems that have yet to be solved and points out new avenues for research. Why do some people feel unwell during a lightning storm? Why is there a correlation between the level of electromagnetic background and the incidence of cancer? Is there? Why do so many medical centers use electromagnetic exposures to treat a wide variety of disorders in humans. The international scientific community is extremely interested in theory of magnetobiology and the answers to these and other questions, as evidenced by the growing number of research associations in the United States, Europe, and other parts of the world. The World Health Organization has named electromagnetic contamination in occupational and residential areas as a stress factor for human beings. This book stands out at recent texts on magnetobiology because it draws on a strong foundation of empirical and theoretical evidence. Theoretical evidence and empirical evidence, not hard evidence, to explain the various effects of magnetic fields on the human body. It contains the first comprehensive collection of experimental data bearing physical information, frequency and amplitude, power spectra, and original research data on how electromagnetic fields interfere with ions and molecules inside the proteins of living organisms. Biological effects of the hypomagnetic field, an analytical review of experiments and theories. Vladimir N. Binhe. This is the guy who wrote the book. Abstract. During interplanetary flights in the near future, not going to happen, a human organism will be exposed to prolonged periods of hypomagnetic field that is 10,000 times weaker than that of Earth's. Attenuation of the geomagnetic field occurs in buildings with steel walls and in buildings with steel reinforcement. It cannot be ruled out also that a zero magnetic field might be interesting in biomedical studies and therapy. Okay, whatever, now we're getting into blah blah blah. I looked up electromagnetic radiation in health. At sufficiently high flux levels, various bands of electromagnetic radiation have been found to cause deleterious health effects in people. Electromagnetic radiation can be classified into two types, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, based on the capability of a single photon, which don't exist, with more than 10 eV energy to ionize oxygen or break chemical bonds. So perhaps this is what she's referring to, ionized oxygen or breaking chemical bonds, because this has to do with ionized radiation, not non-ionized radiation. It's a different frequency. Extreme ultraviolet and high frequencies such as X-rays and gamma rays are ionizing, and these pose their own special hazards. See radiation, radiation poisoning. The last quarter of 20th century saw a dramatic increase in the number of devices emitting non-ionizing radiation in all segments of society, which resulted in an elevation of health concerns by researchers and clinicians, and an associated interest in government regulation for safety purposes. In the United States, this has resulted in legislation such as the Radiation Control for Health and Safety Act in 1968, and the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. This is a long time ago. By far the most common health hazard of radiation is sunburn, which causes over 1 million new skin cancers annually in the United States. Well, sunburn isn't caused by man-made devices, right? Now, there's all of these references, and I clicked on several of them and looked them up, and not one of them has any proof. They have a lot of sensationalistic titles, such as World Health Organization, electromagnetic fields and public health, mobile phones, fact sheet, electromagnetic fields and public health, mobile phones. So mobile phones are low-powered radio frequency transmitters operating at frequencies between 450 and 2700 megahertz, nowhere near even 1 gigahertz, with peak powers in the range of 0.1 to 2 watts. And if you recall, the wattage is important. The amount of power that is put behind the transmitter in emitting these frequencies is important. None of these devices use enough power to emit a frequency that is dangerous. The handset only transmits power when it is turned on. The power falls off rapidly with increasing distance from the handset. A person using a mobile phone 30 to 40 centimeters away from their body, like in texting, will therefore have much lower frequency exposure than someone holding the handset against their head. Mobile devices are often prohibited in hospitals and airplanes as the radio frequency signals may interfere with certain electromedical devices and navigation systems. Are there any health effects? A large number of studies have been performed over the last 2 decades to assess whether mobile phones pose a potential health risk. To date, no adverse health effects have been established as being caused by mobile phone use. Short-term effects. Tissue heating is the principal mechanism of interaction between radio frequency energy and the human body. At frequencies used by mobile phones, most of the energy is absorbed by the skin and other superficial tissues, resulting in negligible temperature rise in the brain or in any other organ of the body. A number of studies have investigated the effects of radio frequency fields on brain activity, cognitive function, sleep, heart rate, blood pressure in volunteers. To date, research does not suggest any consistent evidence of adverse health effects from exposure to radio frequency fields at low levels below those that are causing tissue heating. Furthermore, research has not been able to provide support for a causal relationship between exposure to electromagnetic fields and self-reported symptoms or electromagnetic hypersensitivity. Because many cancers are not detectable until many years after the interactions that led to the tumor, and since mobile phones were not widely used until the early 1990s, studies at present can only assess those cancers that become evident within shorter time periods. However, results of animal studies consistently show no increased cancer risk for long-term exposure to radio frequency fields, as in with the rat experiment that was conducted at high power levels over a 2-year period. There are some indications of an increased risk of glioma for those who reported the highest 10% of cumulative hours of cell phone use, although there was no consistent trend of increasing risk with greater duration of use. The researchers concluded that biases and errors limit the strength of these conclusions and prevent a causal interpretation. Based largely on this data, IARC has classified radio frequency electromagnetic fields as possibly carcinogenic to humans, group 2B, a category used when a causal association is considered credible, but when chance, bias, or confounding cannot be ruled out with reasonable confidence. Now, cancer.gov. There are several articles on this website, and what I'm only going to touch on, because I could be here forever, is workplace exposures to radio frequency radiation. A limited number of studies have evaluated risks of cancer in workers exposed to radio frequency radiation. A large study of U.S. Navy personnel found no excess of brain tumors among those with high probability of exposure to radar, including electronics technicians, aviation technicians, and fire control technicians. However, non-lymphocytic leukemia, particularly acute myeloid leukemia, was increased in electronics technicians in aviation squadrons, but not in Navy personnel in other job categories. There was no evidence that electrical utility workers who were exposed to pulsed electromagnetic fields produced by power lines were more likely to develop brain tumors or leukemia than the general population. Employees of large manufacturers of wireless communication products were not more likely to die of brain tumors or cancers than the general population. A large prospective study among police officers in Great Britain found no evidence for an association between radio frequency EMF exposure from personal radio use and the risk of all cancers combined. So there's no link, no evidence, none. This guy, his name is WapTech on YouTube. He has few subscribers, very few videos, but he speaks with sensibility and has some interesting points that are verifiable. He's got links below.
If an oscillation period existed that would cause it to do something interesting, like break apart, which it doesn't, it just means you're taking the molecule and spinning it, and it's not interfering with its ability to bond with hemoglobin, because hemoglobin does something totally different, that would be 2.4 million terahertz, not 2.4 gigahertz. You're now off by a million. If we based it on its actual resonant frequency, or 55 terahertz, so even the measured oscillation period, the actual resonant frequency that you find in oxygen atoms that are bound together as O2, is still, it's 55 terahertz. It's literally 1,000 times off at minimum. Or the other one where it's literally a multiple, at least it's kind of a multiple, it's off by over a million, over a billion. Hydrogen chloride resonates at 86, carbon monoxide at 64, and nitrous oxide at 53 terahertz. None of them are any audio frequency or multiple. None of them are some octave off of some sort of preferred frequency for resonance. This is a bullshit story that people decided to post on YouTube because, well, you might want to find out what their motivations are, because if they can't look this shit up, you shouldn't listen to them. Citations below. Be sure to argue with them. 5G achieves significant throughput improvements relative to LTE in the sub-6 gigahertz bands. LTE Advance already uses such and such, eliminating the advantage of 5G in frequency range 1, FR1. The maximum proposed frequency range in Europe is 2.4 to 2.7 gigahertz as their frequency bandwidth, centering on basically 2.6 gigahertz. Not 60, not 600 gigahertz, none of which would cause resonance in any of these molecules at all. That's not how microwaves work. Please stop referencing it. Something they found out, at 40 gigabits per second, the maximum rate potentially supported by a hypothetical configuration range of 24 to 86 gigahertz, which you could kind of shoehorn the 60 gigahertz range in, which doesn't affect you. It doesn't affect oxygen. It doesn't affect water molecules. Not the way you're talking. It doesn't travel as well or make it through as many obstacles as the low-frequency standard. July 2016, the Federal Communications Commission of the United States government freed up the bandwidth in the underused high-frequency bandwidth spectrum in the frequency range declared range 1, FR1, that is below 6 gigahertz. So what happened with the fearmongers? They just added a zero and said it was 60 gigahertz. When you try to look it up as 60 gigahertz, all you do is find them. Or you might find a reference to European Union places saying that would be part of the range of 24 to 86 gigahertz. It doesn't make a difference. None of these are the resonant frequency for oxygen atoms, water molecules, or anything. They're not more effective at cooking you. They're even less effective at getting through things. And they're not really all that useful except for one thing. Mesh networks. You can set up lots and lots of little low-power signal sources and get decent communications. It can't go very far, but when it does go from point A to point B line of sight, it doesn't get interfered with, that's all. They're looking for frequency ranges that are not being used. These aren't being used for anything. That's the only reason they're using it. So I'm going to repeat this. Water molecules, oxygen molecules, etc. do not resonate at microwave frequencies, nor do they resonate at 60 gigahertz. They resonate at literally thousands, millions, or billion times the frequency. And none of this has any effect on the electron orbits, because those would be, the frequency range doesn't even have a name. I'd have to go look up its actual name. This is really obscure crap. And this idea of oxygen atoms not being able to bond to hemoglobin is based on you looking up what experiment? And I got to point out one more thing. One of the assertions is that a large number of scientists are complaining about radio frequencies. Really? And who were they? Did they show their faces, their names? How many of them? Did you count them? Can we go double check their numbers? It's about 60 people who show up on YouTube over and over again, out of the hundreds of thousands or millions of scientists who say, why are you asking me these stupid questions?
Okay, now this is a plain truth for you. And he connects 5G with coronavirus, and he calls it a digital virus. And so let's hear what he has to say.
The coronavirus and 5G being interconnected. We learned that there were forced vaccinations this past year in Wuhan.
Okay, I just did a quick search for forced vaccines Wuhan before coronavirus, and there's no results. Nothing is coming up.
We know that 40 years ago there was a book written by Mr. Kuntz, Days of Darkness, that predicted a pandemic created from the Wuhan virus 40 years ago. We also learned recently that the 5G was massively installed all around Wuhan. So is there a connection between 5G and the coronavirus? And the answer is yes, big time yes. 5G is about creating a smart grid that can track everybody and everything. The smart grid with 5G towers every 100 yards is to track all movements. And again, folks, we're not even talking about all the 40,000 intralinks that Elon Musk has said to put up there in those high altitude platforms and all the stuff they're putting above us in the skies. Most people are only talking about ground-based 5G when in fact it's coming from the air. 5G is being transmitted down. I'm out here in the rurals, and they've got 3 companies now. They're saying, oh, we can get your 5G out to the rurals now. We can get you. And it's all connected to AT&T platforms, I've learned. So they're all tapping into these high-altitude platforms. They don't have big, old, huge towers out here. They don't have small cell towers in our areas, repeaters and whatnot. So
I just took a quick diversion to the AT&T website. Wireless internet service for customers living in select rural areas who cannot get a traditional AT&T internet service. All we need to do is come by to install your wireless equipment and an antenna to connect you. A professional installer will confirm sufficient signal strength at your location before installation. Now, if you recall in a previous video to do with Jeffrey Epstein, they were using balloons to provide internet service to rural areas. So whether or not that's 5G, I don't know. It's possible, it's likely. So, but still, it doesn't necessarily even matter whether it's 5G because it's not going to be at the 60 frequency, the 60 gigahertz frequency, because it needs to be operating on a higher range if it's coming from a balloon in the sky.
The key is to understand the smart grid with 5G towers every 100 yards. The 5G's 60 gigahertz tech interacts biologically with oxygen molecules, interfering with its ability to bind to hemoglobin, causing people to suffocate. This is the new thing to understand. It's a digital ID virus, okay?
So where is his proof? He says that 5G is creating a smart grid to track everybody and everything. Now, first of all, in order to track anything, there has to be a chip for it to read. It has to be a transmitter and a receiver. So the only thing it can track is your phone, and we've already seen that you need to have a 5G phone in order for it to work on 5G. The idea that everything is going to be part of the Internet of Things, it's not going to be everything. It's only going to be the things that have this chip in it. You need a transmitter and a receiver. So this is a little bit blown out of proportion. And he says here, I think this is his post. He's not taking it from somewhere. He's written this. This little post is being scanned right now by AI-driven software supercomputers. Okay, so if he's posted this thing on social media, yes, the chances are that there's some sort of software that is reading the post, but he just puts that in there that doesn't really connect to the smart grid. It's kind of making a connection where there is none. The smart grid with 5G towers every 100 yards is track all relevant movements in society. You cannot track anything unless it has a chip, transmitter and receiver. If you are using CCTV cameras, then you can still track people. But that has nothing to do with 5G. This is a false statement. You are not tracking all relevant movements in society. He's making a broad statement. He's not saying whose movements. He's not saying how it's tracking. He's just stating that it tracks all movements in society. I mean, this is dangerous language that he's using. 5G's 60 gigahertz tech interacts biologically with oxygen molecules. Again, it is not 60 gigahertz they are using. They are not using that frequency. Also, it does not interact biologically with oxygen molecules. It is blocked by oxygen molecules. Oxygen interferes with the technology's ability to transmit frequencies. Now, the other woman said that it causes the electrons to rotate, and I haven't found any proof of that. She didn't provide any proof of that. Interfering with its ability to bind to hemoglobin. There's no proof of that either. Causing people to suffocate. There's no proof of that either. So he's made 3 connections with 0 proof. Digital ID will allow 5G to specifically identify and target any individual. We don't have digital ID, and you cannot specifically identify and target any individual using 5G without a receiver or transmitter. Facial recognition software can identify you, but you don't need 5G to do that. And so you can also target any individual already. You don't need 5G to do that. This is fear porn. Wuhan recently installed 5G. Yes, a lot of places recently installed 5G. As soon as 5G went live, the coronavirus scare began. Videos of people abruptly dropping dead. I haven't seen any videos of anybody dropping dead. Granted, I haven't watched all of the videos, so I haven't seen any videos of people dropping dead. Close to what you might imagine a person who can't uptake oxygen might do. It's an assumption. Yes, if you cannot breathe, you would probably pass out. And they say the effects of the virus, while babies have supposedly recovered in 2 days, no virus causes people to abruptly collapse and die like the people seen in the videos. Their bodies are rushed away and no autopsy is performed because it's too dangerous. Okay, I don't know of any proof of there's no autopsies being performed. I mean, they would have to know for certain that this person was killed by coronavirus. And first of all, if there are videos of people dropping dead, guaranteed they're fake. Because if somebody around you drops dead, you're not going to be videotaping it. And chances are you're not going to just happen to videotape somebody dropping dead. So this guy fell down and everybody just stands around looking at him? Nah, this is bullshit. I didn't see anything real, anything legitimate. And it's like 3 cases of people falling over because of coronavirus caught on camera. The 2019-2020 coronavirus outbreak timeline was first identified in Wuhan, China, in December 2019. China officially launches 5G networks November 1st. But here it says February 21st, the launch of 5G telecom networks has reportedly been delayed due to the coronavirus. So which is it? October 31st, launching 5G earlier than expected. So even if it did roll out October 31st, and the first case was December in Wuhan, why is it that in 2018 we saw multiple cities in Europe released 5G and had no cases of coronavirus? This is all hearsay, made up, and exaggerated, and I can't take it seriously. I really can't. Now this article here, Wuhan coronavirus has nothing to do with 5G, 29th of January 2020. The main implication of the claim is that 5G can impact immune system is totally unfounded. There's no evidence linking the new coronavirus to 5G. It's true Wuhan does have some 5G coverage. The local government listed a number of venues with 5G coverage in August 2019. We can't find evidence it was the very first city with 5G. Well, it wasn't. I already showed you. But we've seen reports saying Wuhan was one of the several Chinese cities where early 5G trials took place. Another said Wuhan was one of the first pilot cities of the 5G network in China. This is a UK's independent fact-checking charity, so this is written by some random person, so, take it with a grain of salt. In October 2019, China's 3 state telecom companies announced they'd be rolling out phone services that use 5G, and that big cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and I'm not going to pronounce those two, were already covered by the network. And there is no evidence that 5G is harmful to humans. 5G is the next generation of wireless technology and transmitted over radio waves. A small part of the whole electromagnetic spectrum includes microwaves, visible light, and X-rays. These radio waves are non-ionizing, meaning they do not damage the DNA inside cells as X-rays, gamma rays, and UV rays are able to do. 5G, although at slightly higher frequencies than previous networks, is still in this radio part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Public Health England has said there's no convincing evidence that exposure below International Commission non-ionizing radiation guidelines can cause adverse health effects. These guidelines go up to 300 gigahertz, whereas the maximum for 5G will probably be in the tens of gigahertz. And the main buzz is about 60 gigahertz because of the interference with oxygen, which is why they are making something out of nothing. There is no evidence that 5G can damage the immune system. So now they're saying that it's not the case, that it's the common cold. Coronavirus spreading in Wuhan has commonly been referred to by the media as just another coronavirus. It is just one type within the family of viruses. Right, coronavirus is a category for the common cold. Everything so far that they have stated has been false. Everything. So one more article by The Guardian, which is a broadsheet newspaper in London, England. How baseless fears over 5G rollout have created a health scare. Misconceptions about the technology and lack of consultation with local communities may have boosted conspiracy theories. Now listen, I'm all for understanding what's really going on here. I am not for hopping on the bandwagon for conspiracy theories, and I'm also not for going flatly against the mainstream simply because it's the mainstream. And yes, a lot of what the mainstream says is lies, is bullshit, but a lot of what they say is true as well. You have to be able to sort between the lies and the truth. I just want to know what the truth is. Okay, so this was July 2019. So Howard Jones is EE's head of technology communications. Jones's firm, there are absolutely no evidence that 5G or any other part of the network is dangerous. The wavelengths that 5G uses and will use are all entirely safe and have been in research and testing for decades. It's a red herring to say it's a new technology and therefore hasn't been tested. To fully debunk the health fears around 5G is impossible. There is no consistent set of claims being made. Few explicit studies are being cited, and a surfeit of scientific terminology being used in ways that obscure rather than illuminate. So Scott Petty, Vodafone's chief technology officer, says that some of the misinformation stems from the United States, where a particular form of 5G using a part of the radio spectrum known as millimeter wave or MM wave technology will be put to use. It hasn't been used in mobile phone networks before, largely because it's not particularly good at the job. As a high-frequency part of the spectrum, it's more easily blocked by things like trees and glass. When there's clear line of sight, it can carry more information than parts of the spectrum now used for mobile phones, but not enough to make it worth the trade-off for Vodafone. The use of millimeter wave has allowed some scary inferences to be drawn. The spectrum has previously been used for two other well-reported purposes: the body scanners installed in airports over the last decade, and an experimental U.S. weapon called the active denial system, which fires a high-powered beam at a target, creating a burning sensation. It's easy to see how that link can be spun into something fearful, but 5G is no more a weapon of war than a Wi-Fi router is a microwave oven, even though both those products use the same part of the spectrum around the 2.4 gigahertz mark. All ionizing radiation lies at the extremely high frequency, but between X-rays and millimeter waves lies quite a large part of the spectrum that people interact with all of the time: visible light. Here's a video that shows how cell phones work, and this is from the 1940s, the first mobile telephones that were basically car phones, but it was a cell phone basically. This is how it works.
In the case of a call from a vehicle, it is transmitted from the car to the nearest of the several station receiving antennas. These are connected by telephone lines to the base station. By having several receiving antennas, it is ensured that the reception from mobile units having relatively low-powered transmitters and antennas close to the ground will not be blocked by high buildings. After the call reaches the receiving station antenna, it is handled like a regular telephone call. The return message, that is the base station end of the call, goes out over a telephone line to a transmitter which is powerful enough to cover the entire city from a single, high, centrally located antenna. When mobile telephone equipment is used, the push-to-talk button on the handset is pushed down when a person talks and released when he listens. Thus, the mobile telephone equipment in the car transmits when the handset button is down and receives when the button is up. Now let's see the equipment that makes mobile telephone service work. Here in an automobile, a transmitter unit and a receiver unit are being compactly and neatly installed. Sometimes a larger battery and generator are needed for additional power. The flexible antenna is mounted on top of the vehicle, or in the case of trucks, on the side toward the rear.
Nothing's changed. This is still how it operates, but it's a little bit more sophisticated now. 5G is the fifth generation wireless technology for digital cellular networks that began wide deployment in 2019. As with previous standards, the covered areas are divided into regions called cells, serviced by individual antennas. Virtually every major telecommunication service provider in the developed world is deploying antennas or intends to deploy them soon. The frequency spectrum of 5G is divided into millimeter waves: mid-band and low band. Low band uses similar frequency range as its predecessor, 4G. 5G millimeter wave is the fastest, with actual speeds being between 1 to 2 gigabytes down. Frequencies are above 24 gigahertz, reaching up to 72 gigahertz, which is above the extremely high frequency band's lower boundary. The reach is short, so more cells are required. Millimeter waves have difficulty traversing many walls and windows, so indoor coverage is limited. Frequencies deployed are from 2.4 gigahertz to 4.2 gigahertz. So again, this is not anywhere near 60 gigahertz. And this is 24 to 72, which is around, inclusive of the 60 gigahertz, but it is short range. and highly unlikely to be used because it's inefficient. It doesn't work. It's not cost effective for them either. So Sprint and China Mobile are using 2.5 gigahertz, while others are mostly between 3.3 and 4.2 gigahertz, a range which offers increased reach. Many areas can be covered simply by upgrading existing towers, which lowers the cost. Electromagnetic spectrum is the range of frequencies of the electromagnetic radiation and their respective wavelengths and photon energies. Now, there's no such thing as a photon, so it's just light energy. This ionizing radiation is harmful. Now you're looking at visible light is within 300 terahertz, 30 terahertz, 3 terahertz. So then you got 300 gigahertz. It's extremely high frequency. 30 gigahertz. Radio and TV, nobody makes a stink about radio and TV. Radiation of each frequency and wavelength has a mix of properties of the two regions of the spectrum that bound it. For example, red light resembles infrared radiation in that it can excite and add energy to some chemical bonds, and indeed must do so to power the chemical mechanisms responsible for photosynthesis and the workings of the visual system. So one person I want to mention is Arthur Firstenberg. The reason I want to mention him is because many people bring him up in reference to proof that there is some problem with 5G radio frequencies, and I don't think that this person is right. And his book that they bring up most of the time is The Invisible Rainbow, A History of Electricity and Life. He went to medical school, but he didn't complete his medical school because of an illness which he attributes to electromagnetic hypersensitivity brought on by receiving 40 diagnostic dental x-rays. X-rays operate at a different frequency on the spectrum, on the electromagnetic spectrum. I don't know why anybody would expose to 40 dental x-rays. Wireless technology is on the opposite end of the spectrum. So since 1996, Firstenberg has argued in numerous publications that wireless technology is dangerous. And he is behind the petition to get people to stop 5G. That petition has kind of gone viral. 10,000 scientists have signed a petition against 5G. Now, in January 2010, this is the reason why I think that there's, something else going on with this man. In January 2010, Firstenberg filed a lawsuit against his neighbor seeking damages of $500,000 for refusing to turn off her cell phone and other electronic devices because he claimed that because of shared wiring, electromagnetic fields from his neighbor's electronic devices were keeping him up at night and destroying his health. He stated he was made homeless as a result, and the courts dismissed his case in 2012, citing lack of sufficient supporting evidence. He appealed, and it was still dismissed. This, to me, shows that his intense focus on this aspect of his life has manifested his illness. Because if there's not sufficient proof, if it's keeping him up at night, he's focused on that, he's stressed out, and it is destroying his health, he is doing it to himself. From 1996, he's been obsessed with it. I'm assuming it's all he does. From reading the number of books, he makes public talks, he's filed lawsuits. That's obsession. He is so focused on it that it is creating his health issues. I came across this video trying to get evidence that 5G has an impact on oxygen molecules. I cannot find any evidence whatsoever. None. Now I came across this video, which is highly suspicious looking because I don't know what NTD News is. This woman is Australian, yet she's reporting on something that is coming from Toronto. And it has doctors call for delaying deployment of 5G due to health risks, 79,000 views, and the channel is NTD. A New York-based global news and entertainment media founded in 2001, its mission is to uplift and inform society by publishing quality content that embodies integrity, dignity, and the best of humanity. Well, they failed on that count with this video anyway. And it says, at NTD, we believe the integrity of our world hinges on the accurate and truthful spread of information. We dedicate ourselves to providing truth at no matter the cost and shedding light on major issues. Well, let's have a look at some of the videos that they post. And it's pretty standard kind of news. But it's all, I mean, uplifting. This is all fear-mongering information. None of this is uplifting, positive. It's all about coronavirus, 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 military. Like, come on. Alright, so that's that channel. And then there's this lady.
Generation technology promises faster download speeds and conveniences that most of us have never dreamed of, but will also be blanketed with a new type of radiation called millimetre waves. Health experts are warning about the rising risks with a 5G rollout.
It's not been made clear to the public that 5G won't just be another number and letter on your cell phone.
I don't know why the president of Microsoft Canada would be there, but these so-called experts are providing misleading information.
Doctors and scientists have added their voices.
The most prevalent symptoms include headache, fatigue, decreased ability to...
Please take note, chemical engineer MD. She's a chemical engineer.
Concentrate, tinnitus, irritability, and insomnia. Impact.
So she just said that the symptoms for sensitivity to, I mean, it can't be 5G because this is before 5G was released. So this is sensitivity to Wi-Fi or radiation, radio waves. Saying that the symptoms are tinnitus, so ringing in the ears, insomnia, and irritability. That can come from anything. There is no way that you can prove that this comes from radiation waves. It's absolutely impossible. First of all, we're surrounded by radio waves. We have AM, FM radio, we have television, CB radios, cell phones, Wi-Fi. There's a whole host of radio waves that are in the atmosphere. The only way you're going to escape them is if you go into the country well away from everything. So just keep that in mind.
Impacts on the heart and the nervous system are also of great concern.
So she said the heart and the nervous system. She has not said oxygen. She has not said oxygen absorption. She has not said anything to do with the immune system. Keep that in mind.
Dr. Rena Bray has been working at the Provincial Environmental Health Clinic for 15 years and seen the number of people suffering adverse effects from electromagnetic exposure rising.
She's an environmental health consultant, has been a medical director of the Environmental Health Clinic at the Women's College Hospital and associate professor of the Department of Family and Community Medicine for over 10 years. Dr. Bray achieved first-class honors in chemical engineering, then earned her Master's of Science degree in pharmacology and biomedical engineering in the area of addictions and toxicology. She then studied medicine at the University of Toronto and did her specialty in family practice at UBC. Dr. Bray has also then completed a fellowship in environmental health at the University of Toronto. She holds a Master's of Health Sciences in Family and Community Medicine. I have a question. This woman doesn't have a PhD, so how does she call herself a doctor?
Dr. Magda Havas is internationally recognized for her research on the biological effects of electromagnetic pollution.
Now this says live blood, and this is Rulu. What's Rulu? After Wi-Fi, 10 minutes, before Wi-Fi. But this isn't comparing the same thing. So I had to look up Rulu blood, and what it says is they are stacks or aggregations of red blood cells that form because of the unique discoid shape of the cells in vertebrates. They occur when the plasma protein concentration is high, and because of them, the ESR is also increased. An aggregation of red blood cells resembling a stack of coins on the peripheral blood smear caused by the presence of any macromolecule in plasma, normal or abnormal, with a large axial ratio. They occur when the plasma protein concentration is high. This doesn't have anything to do with radiation as far as I can see. I do a search Rulu blood Wi-Fi and this comes up, and wouldn't you know it, she wrote the paper. Radiation from wireless technology affects the blood. Magda Havas. Sorry, but she's the only one who's saying that there's an effect. Can't use it.
She said that at high intensities, these waves cause intense heat and pain because sweat glands on the surface of our skin act like mini antennas.
At lower frequencies, scientists are predicting damage to eyes.
You're going to enjoy this one. When I looked up Dr. Magda Havas, quack immediately came up in the search. She has a really bad reputation. Evilcyber.com. Trust me, I'm a Dr. Magda Havas and Wi-Fi.
Cancer is a very slow-growing thing. We think that attention deficit disorder might actually be related to some of these exposures, and there's very limited evidence that autism might also be related to living in a high electromagnetic environment.
So this is her campaign to try and get it taken out of schools. I don't know whether she's just sort of giving herself a job or what her deal is, but she's trying to link ADD and autism to electromagnetism, but that's not what the cause is. So she hasn't even come up with solid evidence to state that that is the cause. She's just saying there could be. She has a PhD, she's a professor, and she works at a university. For most people, that's enough to accept her credibility. However, her PhD is in botany, giving her no qualifications in the field of medicine or physics. She is employed as associate professor at Trent University, but we don't have to drive far to see how valued her opinion is there. Her colleagues felt it necessary to disassociate themselves from her in a comment posted on the above video. On the issue of health effects on radio frequency waves, a large body of evidence now exists, and the international consensus is described in the references listed on the physics website. Based on these considerations, we do not believe that electromagnetic waves associated with Wi-Fi in schools pose a health risk to children or teachers. Professor Bill Atkinson, Peter Dawson, David Patton, Ralph Scheel, Alan Slavin, and Rachel Wardis, members of the Department of Physics, Trent University. Holy shit. Holy shit, people. This is why it's important that you have to dig deeper, and you have to trust your gut. So like when I was watching that video, I was like, no, something is wrong here. This doesn't ring true. And I dug deeper, and this is what I found.
The Swiss government and the World Health Organization share the largest microwave research studies, and some of these studies are showing adverse effects. By having such a close association with the World Health Organization, what has the Swiss government learned about Wi-Fi that we are unaware of? Cell phone radiation is mainly limited to the duration of the call. However, if you live close to cell phone towers, you're exposed to constant microwave radiation from the antennas. Here, I am measuring the constant radiation emitted by the cell phone antennas on top of this apartment building. And as you can see and hear from our microwave meter, the intensity is quite high. These high levels of microwave radiation that are used to connect our cell phones can also be found in our homes. They are generated by cordless phones, cordless baby monitors, and Wi-Fi base stations. Hi, my name is Magda Havas. Today we're going to look at some of the equipment in your home that emits microwave radiation.
Listen, nobody's debating whether these instruments give off microwave radiation or radiation. They have to in order to function. That's their purpose. What they are debating is whether or not it has any adverse effects on health. So showing people that it gives off this frequency doesn't prove anything. So this study that she was pointing out in the video actually comes to the opposite conclusion than the one that she used to back up her opinion. Microwave exposure of 100 male rats, we've talked about this experiment before, showed no biologically significant effects on general health. On the comments, I confronted Dr. Havas with this quotation, to which she replied, if the experiment had just gone on long enough, it would have shown that she's correct. Well, that's a ridiculous statement. The average life expectancy of rats is 2 to 3 years, and it would have taken some pretty strong necromancy to let the experiment go on further. As long as she stayed more or less within her field of botany, she managed to get published in peer-reviewed journals. The more outlandish her claims about radiation, the more unlikely they were to appear anywhere. Her last paper, published in a journal that can be taken seriously, dates from 2008. European Journal of Oncology, that was not happy with health authorities because they discredited the link between cancer and aspartame. So basically they started their own journal, and they published her paper. Provocation study using heart rate variability shows microwave radiation from 2.4 gigahertz cordless phone affects autonomic nervous system, although it violates most principles of real research, such as the randomization of test subjects and having a control group. I mean, that's pretty basic stuff. This is really bad. This is just bad. This is so bad. She's passing off her beliefs as science. Go and have a look at the Havas challenge. Basically, they ask her and this Weatherall fellow to participate in a double-blind study. They refuse. Not only do they refuse, but she attacks them. I'll read this introduction to give you an overview of what this is about. Dr. Magda Havas alleges that Wi-Fi can cause serious health effects such as heart irregularities in susceptible individuals. She has been extremely active in campaigns across Canada to have Wi-Fi removed from schools. The following is a challenge that has been issued to Dr. Havas for independent replication of her claim that Wi-Fi can cause heart irregularities. One of her prime references is Mr. Martin Weatherall, who claims that Wi-Fi causes him to experience serious heart irregularities. Dr. David Langelben is the head of cardiology at Montreal Jewish General Hospital to conduct an independent double-blind test. It's interesting to note that Dr. Havas has flatly refused to accept our challenge. Instead, she has chosen to make wild and false allegations of some sort of conspiracy designed to protect my alleged personal interests. There's a clear indication that she is afraid that her heart rate study will be shown to be fatally flawed and that she has no credible evidence that Wi-Fi can cause health effects. When it led me to this, and it exposed these people as frauds, I was not surprised. I knew there was something fishy about it. You could say she's trying to prove something going up against mainstream media, but you read her letters. The letters coming from Lauren Trottier and Joe Schwartz are very professional. They're very respectful. They're very calm and level-headed. Martin Weatherall, he opens his response. You may have a PhD, but you're an ignorant fool on the health effects of pulsed microwave electromagnetic radiation. So he starts out with an attack, and he has a vested interest. Martin Weatherall is co-director of WEEP. So what is WEEP? The Canadian Initiative to Stop Wireless Electric and Electromagnetic Pollution. So he probably gets funding somewhere, and so now he's got a vested interest to protect his interest in taking down Wi-Fi. Now his claim is blind testing by Professor Magda Havas of Trent University has shown during blind testing that his heart rate doubles when exposed to a Wi-Fi router or a cordless phone. Let me just read this excerpt of her letter. This is after several letters in the exchange, so her emotions are running high, but this is a little bit nutty, I think. You are both living in a fantasy world of your own making and think you can bully or buy whatever you want. You're wrong. You're so out of touch with people who are suffering from electrohypersensitivity that you think you can do an experiment in a hospital setting in Montreal. That's like testing someone with peanut allergies on a peanut farm. Let them eat cake is what comes to mind. Martin could not drive or survive in Montreal. Here is a bit of advice. Consider it a free tip. If you do testing, do it in an electromagnetically clean environment. This is so basic, I'm surprised you hadn't thought of it. If this was her issue, why wouldn't she say that from the start? Why wouldn't she just say, oh, I'm very open to having this experiment conducted, but we really should do it in a clean environment, and I have a recommendation. Let's conduct it here, like any normal, sane person would. But no, instead she uses that as her last out and throws it at them in this manner. It's a very unprofessional interchange. And I would imagine that, judging from the backlash that she receives, that she's not taken seriously. I don't know how she maintains her job at Trent University if nobody respects her, but she's not taken seriously. Her colleagues want nothing to do with her. She seems a little paranoid as a result of it. I don't know whichever came first, but it's not boding well for their side. It really isn't. So this guy, he wrote back to her, but she never replied. So one of her claims is that she was invited by Lorne onto a radio show and felt ganged up on. I mean, it's highly possible when you're going against, general consensus, it is an uphill battle and it is difficult. First, about the issue of ganging up on you when I invited you to be a guest on my radio show. I asked you to be on because you're a popular figure in the electrosensitivity controversy and I wanted to hear what you had to say. I'm not an expert in the nuances of electromagnetism, so I asked Lorne and another electrical engineer to be part of the discussion. My modus operandi is to let the science speak. Yours spoke very softly and was ripe for criticism. There was no bullying of any type, just a discussion of possible methodological flaws in your research. Your interpretation that this was an attempt to discredit your work is pure paranoia. Research either stands up to scrutiny or it does not. Putting the work under a microscope is not an attempt to discredit. You say that I have an agenda. You're right. My agenda is to promote the evidence-based science. I am not pro or con when it comes to scientific issues. My interest is ensuring that the decisions are made based on proper evidence instead of emotion or hearsay. Of course, I do have views on what constitutes proper evidence. You are also correct in saying that neither I nor Lorne have published in this area. That does not mean we are incapable of evaluating the published research. And we are skeptical about some aspects of your work, especially the electrosensitivity claims. Not that we don't believe the claimants. They are suffering, to be sure. The question is, from what? Now, what I think is going on here is illness manifested from the mind. Okay, your comment about not being able to carry out such experiments in a hospital because it's not electromagnetically clean environment is bizarre. The people claiming to be electrosensitive do not live in an electromagnetically clean environment, yet they say they can detect the presence of some extra source of radiation such as a smart meter. Surely then, even in an electrically dirty environment, they should be able to detect the presence of an added large field. This comment is valid. Yes, there are claims that smart meters cause major problems. I'm not saying that they don't. I don't know. We're not talking about smart meters right now. I don't know of anybody, and pretty much everybody uses a cell phone, but I don't know of anybody who has had any sort of illness arise from a cell phone. Not one. I don't know of anybody who's had any sort of illness arise from a radio, a television, a computer, anything. The only thing that I know of that has arisen from using a computer is carpal tunnel or vision problems from staring at monitors too long or bad back from sitting in a chair for too long. When it comes to radiation problems, I don't know of anybody having any problems from any of these things. And all of these emit radio frequencies. Every single one. We're swimming in a soup of it. And so his point is valid to say you're swimming in a soup of radiation, and yet this person is claiming that they're able to detect the addition of a smart meter or the addition of a cell phone or Wi-Fi or what have you. I admit we do not regard your work as first rate. I admit to being bothered by your ignoring in your public appearances the significant amount of published literature that runs contrary to your views. In the true spirit of science, I would have thought that you would have been eager to grab an opportunity to prove us wrong. This is exactly why I looked this video up in the first place, because I wanted to find proof that there's validity to this claim, and I can't find it. I can't find anything that proves that Wi-Fi, 5G, radiation in this range causes any disruption to human biology, causes any disruption to oxygen. None. Zero. Zilch. That is the conclusion. There is no adverse effects from 5G, Wi-Fi, radiation. We've had this technology since the 40s and nothing. So I'm going to have to say that there isn't anything. I can't go against the evidence. And when the people who are presenting evidence to the contrary are disproven and proven to be quacks and proven to be frauds, I can't side with it. There is no evidence whatsoever. So it's not true. That's got to be the conclusion. It's not true.